The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Sarah Chen's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. She rolled over and was immediately greeted by a wet nose and gentle whimper from Max, her golden retriever, who was already wide awake and eager to start their day. Max wasn't just any dog. He was Riverside Elementary School's beloved therapy dog, known for his gentle soul and uncanny ability to sense when someone needed comfort. Sarah couldn't help but smile as she watched Max prance around the kitchen while she prepared his breakfast. His golden fur caught the early morning light, making him look like he was glowing. As he ate, his tail wagged in perfect circles, creating a gentle thumping sound against the kitchen cabinet. It was their morning symphony, one that had played out hundreds of times before. By 6:15 a.m., Sarah's small blue Honda pulled into the empty school parking lot. The building stood quiet and peaceful, with only the chirping of early birds and rustling leaves breaking the silence. Max sat in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window, leaving little foggy marks on the glass. He was wearing his official therapy dog vest, navy blue with patches that read "Therapy Dog" and "Please Pet Me," looking every bit the professional he was. This morning routine had been their ritual for the past 3 years. First, they would walk the school's perimeter, Max's favorite part because he got to sniff every bush and corner. Then they would set up in Sarah's office, where she worked as the school's counselor, arranging Max's bed and water bowl just so. The students had even decorated his corner with artwork featuring golden retrievers of all shapes and sizes. As they began their morning walk, Max trotted happily beside Sarah, his leash loose between them. He knew every inch of these grounds, from the kindergarten playground with its colorful sliding boards to the 6th grade wing with its wall of windows. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. Max's paws crunched softly on the scattered leaves that had gathered overnight. Sarah checked her watch. 6:30 a.m. Usually at this time, Max would be investigating the butterfly garden that the 4th graders had planted last spring. He loved to stick his nose in the dried lavender plants, making Sarah laugh at his flower-covered snout. But today, something felt different. Max's ears were more alert, his steps more purposeful. Sarah had learned to trust these subtle changes in his behavior. After all, he had an almost magical way of knowing things before anyone else did. Other staff members often asked Sarah how she had trained Max to be such a perfect therapy dog, but she always said the same thing. Max came this way. I just gave him a job. It was true. From the moment she'd adopted him from the local shelter 4 years ago, Max had shown an extraordinary ability to connect with people, especially children. He seemed to know exactly who needed him most on any given day. The school's custodian, Mr. Rodriguez, was usually the first person they encountered each morning. He would save a small treat for Max and tell him, "Guard our school well, amigo." Today, Sarah could see him in the distance, unlocking the cafeteria doors, his keys jingling in the quiet morning air. Max's tail wagged in anticipation of his morning treat, but suddenly, something else caught his attention. Sarah felt the change immediately. Max's body tensed, his nose lifted high in the air, and his ears perked forward. In their 3 years of morning walks, she had never seen him quite like this. The usual gentle, plodding therapy dog had transformed into something more alert, more urgent. His behavior reminded her of those news stories about hero dogs who had sensed danger or discovered something important. "What is it, buddy?" Sarah whispered, gripping his leash a little tighter. Max looked up at her with his soulful brown eyes, and in that moment, she knew their regular morning was about to become anything but regular. The sun was now fully risen, casting long shadows across the school grounds, and somewhere in those shadows, something was waiting to be discovered, something that would change not just their morning routine, but the lives of everyone at Riverside Elementary. No one at the school could have guessed that this ordinary Wednesday would become one of the most extraordinary days in Riverside Elementary's history, or that their beloved therapy dog would soon be hailed as a hero in ways none of them could have imagined. But then again, sometimes the most remarkable stories start on the most ordinary of mornings. Max's sudden change in behavior sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. The gentle therapy dog, who usually walked with a relaxed, happy stride, was now pulling at his leash with determination she'd never seen before. His nose was working overtime, sniffing the air as if he'd caught the most important scent in the world. Sarah had to quicken her pace just to keep up with him. "Max, slow down," Sarah called out, but the golden retriever paid no attention to her command, something that had never happened before. Max had always been perfectly trained, responding to her voice instantly. This was different. There was an urgency in his movement that made Sarah's heart beat faster. They were heading toward the back of the school, where the playground met a small garden area. The space was normally peaceful, filled with butterfly bushes and small benches where students would sit during recess. Now, in the early morning light, shadows stretched across the ground like long fingers, and the bushes swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Max led Sarah past the swing sets, their chains creaking softly in the morning quiet. The dew-covered grass soaked the hem of Sarah's pants as they moved through the yard. She could see their breath in the chilly air, little puffs of white that disappeared as quickly as they formed. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the playground equipment, making it glisten. Suddenly, Max stopped dead in his tracks. His whole body went rigid, and his ears perked forward. They were standing near a dense cluster of bushes at the far end of the playground, an area that needed trimming after the warm summer had caused everything to grow wild. Max's tail, which usually wagged nonstop, was completely still. Then Sarah heard it, a sound so faint she thought she might have imagined it. A tiny whimper, almost like a kitten's cry, but not quite. Max nosed his way through the branches, his body trembling with excitement or anxiety. Sarah couldn't tell which. She followed him, pushing aside the scratchy branches, her heart pounding in her chest. What she saw next made her whole world stop. There, nestled in the shadows of the overgrown bushes, was a small bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. At first, Sarah thought someone had thrown away an old doll or stuffed animal, but then the bundle moved ever so slightly, and another tiny sound escaped from within. Sarah's hands shook as she knelt down beside the bundle. Max was already there, his nose gently touching the blanket, his body protective and alert. With trembling fingers, Sarah carefully pulled back a corner of the blanket, and her breath caught in her throat. A tiny face, red and scrunched, emerged from the folds. A real baby, so new to the world that its skin was still wrinkled, lay there among the dead leaves and twigs. The baby's eyes were closed, and its small chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Sarah quickly took off her warm jacket, her teacher's instincts kicking in despite her shock. She carefully wrapped it around the blanket, trying to shield the infant from the morning chill. Max stayed right there, pressing his warm body against the bundle, seemingly understanding that this tiny human needed heat. "Oh my God, oh my God," Sarah whispered, her words forming little clouds in the cold air. Her hands fumbled for her phone in her pocket, nearly dropping it twice before managing to dial 911. Max never moved from his position, his brown eyes fixed on the baby's face, his body providing a furry shield against the wind. 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's voice seemed to come from 1,000,000 miles away. "I'm at Riverside Elementary School," Sarah managed to say, her voice shaking. "We've found a baby. A newborn baby. In the bushes near the playground. Please hurry." She could hear the panic in her own voice, but she forced herself to stay calm. The baby needed her to be strong right now. While they waited for help to arrive, Sarah noticed more details. The blanket, though thin, was clean. There was a small pink hat on the baby's head, suggesting someone had cared enough to try to keep it warm. These little details made Sarah's heart ache even more. What circumstances would lead someone to leave their baby here, at a school, in the early morning cold? Max shifted slightly, adjusting his position to better block the wind. His usual happy-go-lucky expression was replaced with one of complete seriousness, as if he understood the gravity of his discovery. In the distance, Sarah could hear the first sirens approaching, their wails growing louder by the second. The baby made another tiny sound, and Sarah found herself talking softly, saying whatever came to mind. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now. Max found you. You're going to be okay." She wasn't sure if she was trying to comfort the baby or herself. Max's tail gave a single wag at the sound of his name, but his eyes never left the precious bundle he had discovered. The morning that had started so normally had transformed into something that would change lives forever. As the sound of sirens grew closer and the first rays of sunlight finally reached their hidden corner of the playground, Sarah realized that Max hadn't just found a baby, he had saved a life. The regular therapy dog had become a hero in the most extraordinary way possible. The sound of sirens grew louder as Sarah held the baby close, her hands trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. Max remained vigilant, his warm body pressed against Sarah's leg, his eyes constantly moving between the baby and their surroundings. The morning air felt colder now, or maybe it was just the shock making Sarah shiver. Mr. Rodriguez, the school custodian, was the first to reach them. He came running across the playground, his keys jingling with each step. "Miss Chen, I heard you shouting." His words stopped abruptly when he saw the bundle in Sarah's arms. His face went pale, and he quickly shrugged off his work jacket, creating another layer of warmth around the baby. "Dios mío," he whispered, crossing himself. "I just unlocked those gates 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes. His voice trailed off as he pulled out his phone to call the principal. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the playground as the first teachers began arriving for the day. Sarah could hear confused voices, growing louder as more people noticed the gathering near the bushes. Max, sensing the increasing tension, positioned himself between the growing crowd and Sarah with the baby, his therapy dog training kicking in as he created a calm barrier. Principal Margaret Walsh's heels clicked rapidly across the concrete, the sound getting closer until she appeared, slightly out of breath. "Sarah, what's happening?" Mr. Rodriguez scowled. She stopped mid-sentence, her professional demeanor cracking for just a moment as she saw the tiny face peeking out from the bundle of jackets. "Oh my word," she breathed, kneeling down beside Sarah. Despite her usually composed nature, Dr. Walsh's hands shook as she gently touched the baby's cheek. "The poor little thing is cold as ice." The first paramedics arrived at that moment, their boots crunching on the fallen leaves as they rushed over with their equipment. Sarah found it hard to let go when they reached for the baby, but she knew she had to. Max whined softly, taking a step forward as if to follow the infant, but stayed by Sarah's side when she whispered, "Stay." The female paramedic quickly checked the baby's vital signs, while her partner retrieved a proper thermal blanket and portable heater from their kit. "Baby girl," she announced, "probably only a few hours old. Body temperature is low, but she's fighting. Good respiration." She looked up at Sarah with kind eyes. "You did the right thing, keeping her warm. Your dog probably saved her life. A few more hours out here in this cold." Teachers who had arrived early were gathering at the edges of the scene, their faces a mixture of shock, concern, and disbelief. Some were crying quietly, others were hugging each other for support. A young first-year teacher, Miss Thompson, had her hands pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she watched the paramedics work. Dr. Walsh took charge of the situation, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "Everyone, please give them some space. Janet, please call the front office and let them know we need to send an email to staff. School will start on time, but we'll need coverage for Sarah's first period." She was already thinking ahead, trying to maintain normalcy for the students who would be arriving soon. The police arrived next, their presence adding another layer of gravity to the scene. Detective Laura Martinez introduced herself, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the area. "Who found the baby?" she asked, pulling out a small notebook. "Max did," Sarah explained, her hand automatically going to the dog's head. "He's our therapy dog. He knew something was wrong." Max looked up at the sound of his name, his tail giving a single proud wag. The detective's professional expression softened as she looked at Max. "Good boy," she said softly, before turning back to business. "We'll need to check the security cameras and take statements from everyone who was here early. But first, let's get some pictures of exactly where the baby was found." The paramedics were preparing to transport the baby to the hospital. They had her wrapped in special warming blankets now, with tiny monitors attached to her chest. The female paramedic turned to Sarah one last time. "Would you like to tell her goodbye for now?" Sarah stepped forward, Max right beside her. The baby's color was better already, her tiny face more peaceful now that she was properly warm. "Goodbye, little one," Sarah whispered. "Max and I will be thinking about you." As if understanding, the baby made a small cooing sound. The morning sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the playground. Teachers were making their way inside, many wiping tears from their eyes, others pulling out phones to spread the word. The police had cordoned off the area with yellow tape, making it look strange and out of place in the cheerful school setting. Principal Walsh placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You and Max should take the morning off. Go home, change your clothes, take some time." But Sarah shook her head. "The kids will be here soon. They need their routine. They need Max." She looked down at her faithful companion, who sat alert and ready, despite the morning's excitement. "We'll be okay." As they walked back toward the building, Sarah could hear the whispered conversations, could feel the mix of sadness and hope in the air. This day would be remembered at Riverside Elementary for years to come. The day a therapy dog named Max proved that sometimes angels come with 4 paws and a golden coat, ready to save a life before the morning bell. Detective Laura Martinez sat in the school's security office, her eyes fixed on the grainy footage playing on the monitor. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional click of the mouse as the security guard, Mr. Jenkins, rewound and played different camera angles. Max lay quietly at their feet, having refused to leave Sarah's side during the investigation. "Stop right there," Detective Martinez said suddenly, leaning forward. The timestamp read 4:27 a.m. A shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the screen, moving carefully along the school's fence line. The person was wearing a dark hoodie and carrying something close to their chest. Mr. Jenkins zoomed in, but the image became too blurry to make out any clear features. "They knew about the cameras," Detective Martinez muttered, making notes in her small leather notebook. "See how they're staying in the shadows. This wasn't random. They chose this location carefully." She turned to Sarah, who was absently stroking Max's fur. "Your therapy dog program is pretty well known in the community, isn't it?" Sarah nodded slowly, realization dawning on her face. "We're in the local paper sometimes. Last month, they did a big story about how Max helps kids with anxiety." Max's tail thumped against the floor at the sound of his name. You think someone left the baby here because they knew about Max?" "It's possible," the detective replied, rewinding the footage again. "They picked a spot near where you do your morning walks. The baby was placed where the dog would find it, but hidden enough that no one else would see it in the dark." Mr. Jenkins pulled up another camera angle, this one showing the mysterious figure kneeling behind the bushes for several minutes before hurrying away. "They took time to wrap the baby properly," he observed. "Made sure she was as protected as possible from the cold." Detective Martinez's phone buzzed, and she quickly read the incoming message. "The hospital just sent an update. The baby is doing well. She's about 6 hours old, perfectly healthy aside from the mild hypothermia. They found something else too." She paused, looking at her notes. There was a note tucked into the blanket. It just says, "Please give her a better life than I can." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Max sensed her emotion and pressed closer to her leg, offering comfort as he'd been trained to do. The detective noticed this and smiled sadly. "Your dog doesn't just help kids, does he?" Outside the security office, The school day was in full swing. They could hear children laughing in the hallways, completely unaware of the morning's events. Principal Walsh had decided to keep the discovery quiet for now, telling students that the police were just doing a routine security check. "We'll need to interview all the early morning staff," Detective Martinez continued, flipping through her notebook. Mr. Rodriguez, who unlocked the gates, the cafeteria workers who arrived at 5:45, anyone who might have seen something unusual. She looked up at Sarah. "And we'll need a detailed statement from you about exactly how Max behaved when he found the baby." Sarah described every detail she could remember. How Max had changed direction suddenly, how his body language had shifted from relaxed to alert, how he had led her straight to the bushes. As she talked, Max sat up straighter, as if he knew they were discussing his heroic actions. The detective's phone buzzed again. The hospital lab rushed the blanket analysis. It's a common brand, sold at most department stores. Light yellow, probably new. They also found traces of lavender fabric softener. She made another note. Sometimes small details like this can help us build a picture. Mr. Jenkins spoke up, his voice gentle. "You know, my wife works at the women's shelter downtown. She says sometimes desperate mothers plan things like this very carefully. They want their babies to be found quickly, by good people." He glanced at Max. "Maybe that's why they chose our school. Because of him." Detective Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "We'll check with all the local shelters, crisis pregnancy centers, hospitals. Someone might remember a woman who asked questions about the school or the therapy dog program." She stood up, tucking her notebook away. "And we'll need to alert the media. Carefully. Sometimes publicity can encourage a parent to come forward, knowing their child is safe." Sarah suddenly remembered something. "Last week, a woman was watching us during morning arrival. She was standing across the street, and I remember thinking it was odd because she stayed there for almost an hour." Max kept looking in her direction. The detective immediately pulled her notebook back out, pen poised. "Can you describe her?" As Sarah described the mysterious woman, Max's ears perked up, as if he too was remembering that morning. Outside, the school bell rang, signaling the change of classes. The sound of children's voices filled the hallways again, a reminder that life was going on as normal for most people, even as this drama unfolded in the security office. Detective Martinez gathered her things, preparing to leave. "We'll do our best to find out who left the baby, but remember, they chose this place, this school. Maybe even chose Max specifically. Whatever their reasons, they wanted their baby to be found by people who would care." She paused at the door. "And they were right about that." Sarah hugged Max, burying her face in his soft fur. In just a few hours, this ordinary school day had turned into something extraordinary, and her gentle therapy dog had become the hero at the center of a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. By the time the evening news aired the story, the phones at Riverside Elementary couldn't stop ringing. The image of Max, the heroic therapy dog, sitting proudly next to Sarah, had captured hearts across the city. Local news channels kept replaying the security footage of Max leading Sarah to the bushes, adding to the emotional impact of the story. The school's front office had turned into an impromptu donation center. Boxes of diapers, tiny clothes, and baby supplies began piling up as community members streamed in throughout the day. Mrs. Parker, the school secretary, had to clear her entire desk to make room for all the cards and letters people were dropping off. "Look at this one," Mrs. Parker said, holding up a handmade card covered in glitter and puppy stickers. "It's from a third grader at Lincoln Elementary. She donated her entire piggy bank savings to help the baby." She wiped away a tear as she added the card to the growing collection. Sarah sat in the teacher's lounge during her lunch break, watching Max interact with her colleagues. The usually cheerful room had a different energy today, a mix of sadness, hope, and determination. Max moved from person to person, seeming to know exactly who needed his comfort most at any moment. Miss Thompson, the young first-grade teacher who had been crying earlier, was now organizing a spreadsheet of donations on her laptop. The local baby store called. she announced. They want to donate a year's worth of supplies. And 3 furniture stores have offered cribs. Her eyes were still red from crying, but she had channeled her emotions into action. The school counseling office had been receiving calls all day from people wanting to adopt the baby. Dr. Walsh had to set up a special email address just to handle all the inquiries. The hospital says she's doing great, she told the gathered teachers. They're calling her Baby Hope for now. The nurses say she's quite the little fighter. Outside in the parking lot, local news vans had set up camp, hoping to catch more details about the story. One reporter had brought her own dog, a German Shepherd, perhaps hoping to create a heartwarming moment with Max. But Max stayed inside, dedicated to his duties of comforting the school community. By late afternoon, the local pizza place delivered 20 large pizzas to the school, their contribution to the impromptu staff meeting that had formed. Teachers sat in circles on the floor of the library, sharing their feelings and making plans to help. "We need to think bigger," said Mr. Rodriguez, who had barely spoken all day. "This isn't just about one baby. There must be other mothers out there who need help." Heads nodded in agreement around the room. Mrs. Lee, the art teacher, was already sketching designs for a fundraiser. "We could do a community art show," she suggested. "The kids could make paintings of Max. People love buying children's art, especially for a good cause." The school nurse, Ms. Martinez, had been on the phone with local hospitals and women's clinics. "They want to set up a partnership," she explained. "Use Max as a sort of ambassador for their outreach programs. Show people that there's always help available, that they're not alone." Sarah watched as her colleagues transformed their shock and sadness into determination to make a difference. Max lay in the center of the library, his tail wagging gently as people patted him while walking past. He seemed to understand that he had started something important. The local children's hospital called to ask if Max could become a regular visitor in their newborn unit. The idea of him bringing comfort to other babies and their families brought fresh tears to many eyes. Even the usually stoic gym teacher, Mr. Thompson, had to turn away to compose himself. As evening approached, parents dropping off donations started bringing their children too. Kids who had seen Max on the news wanted to meet the hero dog. One little girl, no more than 5, solemnly presented Max with her own stuffed puppy. "For the baby," she whispered, "so she'll always have a dog to protect her." The story had reached social media, and #HeroMax was trending locally. People shared their own stories of rescue dogs, of times when animals had shown extraordinary kindness and intelligence. A local artist had already created a beautiful digital drawing of Max with angel wings, which was being shared thousands of times. Dr. Walsh gathered everyone just before they left for the day. "Tomorrow, we'll start organizing everything properly," she said. "But today, I just want to thank each of you, and especially you, Max." The dog lifted his head at his name, his brown eyes wise and gentle. As Sarah packed up to leave, exhausted but hopeful, she found a small package on her desk. Inside was a custom-made dog tag for Max that read "Hero of Riverside Elementary." The card was signed by all the teachers. Walking to her car in the dimming light, Sarah reflected on how one discovery had sparked such an outpouring of love and support. Max trotted beside her, still wearing his therapy dog vest, still ready to help whoever needed him. The school building behind them glowed warmly, filled with donations and hope, transformed into something more than just a place of learning. It had become a beacon of community love and support, all because of a gentle dog who followed his instincts on a cold autumn morning. 1 week after the discovery, Principal Margaret Walsh called an emergency staff meeting after school. The library, usually quiet at this hour, was packed with teachers sitting in tight circles. Max lay in his usual spot near Sarah's feet, but today he seemed more alert than usual, as if sensing the heavy emotions in the room. Dr. Walsh stood at the front, holding a manila envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "The police have shared some additional information about the baby's mother," she began, her voice catching. "They found security footage from a nearby gas station. She's very young, probably not more than 16. A collective gasp filled the room. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she thought about a scared teenager making such a heartbreaking decision. Max immediately pressed closer to her leg, offering his steady comfort. Around the room, teachers were reaching for tissues, holding hands, supporting each other. Ms. Thompson, who had been quiet all week, suddenly spoke up. "I keep thinking, she must have watched us, study our routines. She knew about Max." Her voice cracked. "She trusted us with her baby's life." The young teacher broke down, tears flowing freely. Max got up and walked over to her, placing his head gently in her lap, doing what he did best, offering comfort without words. The school nurse shared next. "I can't sleep at night," she admitted, twisting a tissue in her hands. "I keep wondering how many other young girls might be out there, feeling just as scared and alone. How many others might need help but don't know where to turn." Several teachers nodded in agreement, their own sleepless nights reflected in their eyes. Mr. Rodriguez, who had discovered the security footage of the mother, sat in the corner, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by quiet thoughtfulness. "You know what gets me," he said softly. "The way she wrapped that baby up. So careful, so gentle, like she was giving away a piece of her heart." Sarah stood up, her voice shaking slightly. "The detective told me something yesterday. The baby's blanket, it was brand new. The mother must have bought it specially." She paused, gathering herself. "She didn't just abandon her baby. She chose us. She chose Max. She gave her baby the best chance she could think of." Dr. Walsh wiped her eyes and continued. "The hospital staff say baby Hope is thriving. She's gaining weight, responding well to care. But she took a deep breath. They found something else. A very small birthmark on her shoulder, shaped like a heart." The art teacher, Mrs. Lee, who had been sketching throughout the meeting, held up her notepad. She had drawn the baby as she imagined her, peaceful and safe, with Max standing guard beside her crib. The simple sketch captured everything they were feeling: sadness, hope, protection, love. "I've been teaching for 25 years, said Mrs. Johnson, the veteran 6th grade teacher, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've dealt with all sorts of situations, but this," she looked around the room at her colleagues, "this has changed us all." The school counselor shared how students had been processing the news. Older kids were writing letters to the unknown mother, telling her they understood and didn't judge her. Younger ones were drawing pictures of Max with superhero capes and angel wings. One 4th grader had even started a kindness club, inspired by Max's gentle nature. As the meeting continued, teachers shared their personal struggles with the situation. Some admitted crying in their cars after school. Others talked about hugging their own children tighter. Many spoke about feeling a new sense of purpose in their roles as educators. Sarah watched as Max moved around the room, spending time with each person who seemed to need him most. He had always been intuitive about emotions, but since finding the baby, his sensitivity seemed even more pronounced. It was as if he understood that his role had expanded beyond being just a therapy dog. He had become a symbol of hope and compassion. Dr. Walsh shared plans for new school initiatives: parenting classes for teens, a confidential help hotline, partnerships with local social services. "We can't change what happened," she said, "but we can help make sure other young people know they have options, that they're not alone." Near the end of the meeting, the school secretary brought in a small package that had just been delivered. Inside was a handmade quilt, created by a local senior citizens group. The note attached read, "For baby Hope, found by an angel with 4 paws. May she always know she was meant to be found." As teachers began gathering their things to leave, many lingered, not wanting to break the connection they were feeling. The experience had bonded them in a unique way. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were part of something bigger, something that had changed them all deeply. Sarah remained seated, watching as Max made one final round of the room, checking on everyone. She thought about how one cold morning had transformed not just their school, but their understanding of love, sacrifice, and community. The baby was safe, but her story had left an indelible mark on every heart at Riverside Elementary. As the sun set outside the library windows, casting long shadows across the room, Sarah realized that they would never be the same. They had been chosen for something extraordinary, and that knowledge came with both a burden and a blessing. Max returned to her side, his presence a reminder that sometimes the biggest hearts come with 4 paws and a furry coat. 3 months passed, and winter had settled over Riverside Elementary. The morning frost covered the playground where Max had made his remarkable discovery. The bushes were now neatly trimmed, and a small garden was being planned for the spot, a reminder of hope and new beginnings. Emily Martinez, a quiet 4th-grade teacher who had been going through the adoption process for 2 years, sat in her classroom after school, staring at her phone in disbelief. The call she had just received from her social worker seemed almost too perfect to be true. Baby Hope, the little girl Max had found, needed a permanent home, and Emily's application had been approved. Sarah and Max were walking past Emily's classroom when they heard the soft sound of crying. Max immediately changed direction, pulling Sarah toward the door. Inside, they found Emily surrounded by papers, happy tears streaming down her face. "They chose me," she whispered. "They want me to be Hope's mother." The news spread through the school like a warm wave. Teachers who were still in the building gathered in Emily's classroom, bringing coffee and hugs. Max sat beside Emily, his tail gently sweeping the floor as she shared the details of her upcoming motherhood. The adoption agency said something remarkable. Emily explained, her hands shaking with excitement. They said that after reviewing all the applications, they felt it was meant to be. Hope being found at our school, and me already being in the process of adoption. Like it was all part of some bigger plan. Sarah watched as her colleagues celebrated, remembering that cold morning 3 months ago. Max had changed so many lives with his discovery, and now the story was coming full circle. The baby he had found would be part of their school family forever. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. The school community, already invested in Hope's story, embraced the news of Emily's adoption with overwhelming enthusiasm. Teachers organized a surprise baby shower in the library, transforming the space with twinkling lights and tiny paper stars hanging from the ceiling. Mr. Rodriguez had crafted a beautiful wooden crib in his home workshop, carving Max's paw print into the headboard. Mrs. Lee and her art students had painted a magical mural in Emily's spare room, featuring a golden retriever guardian angel watching over a peaceful garden. The day Emily brought Hope home for the first time, Max seemed to know something special was happening. He sat by the school entrance after the final bell, his tail wagging expectantly. When Emily walked in carrying the baby, now 3 months old and full of smiles, Max's entire body wiggled with joy. Hope, bundled in a soft purple blanket, looked around with curious eyes. She had grown from the tiny newborn they had found into a cheerful baby with bright eyes and a heart-shaped birthmark that seemed to glow on her shoulder. When she saw Max, her face lit up with a toothless grin. "She knows you," Emily whispered as Max gently nuzzled the baby's feet, making her giggle. "Somehow, she knows you're the one who saved her." The dog's tail wagged softly as he assumed his protective stance beside Hope, just as he had done on that fateful morning. Principal Walsh had arranged for a special assembly to celebrate Hope's homecoming. The entire school gathered in the gymnasium, where students shared songs, poems, and artwork they had created for their newest family member. A local news crew covered the event, capturing the moment when Hope, in Emily's arms, was officially introduced to her extended school family. The story had touched people far beyond their community. Letters continued to arrive from across the country, many from other therapy dog handlers and their canine partners. Some wrote about similar stories of animals saving lives, while others simply wanted to share their joy at the happy ending. Emily established a tradition of bringing Hope to school every Friday afternoon. The baby became a regular part of the Riverside Elementary family, growing up surrounded by hundreds of honorary aunts and uncles who had been part of her story from the beginning. Max always got especially excited on Hope Days, proudly walking beside her stroller during their visits. The school board officially designated October 15th as Max's Day, the anniversary of the discovery that changed everything. Each year, they would host a community event focusing on support for young parents, animal rescue, and the power of community care. Max attended these events wearing a special vest decorated with a golden star, though he remained as humble and gentle as ever. Sarah often found herself watching Max and Hope together during their Friday visits. The bond between them was extraordinary, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful stories start in the darkest moments. Hope would reach for Max's fur with tiny fingers, and he would patiently let her pat his nose, always gentle, always protective. One particularly meaningful moment came when Hope took her first steps in the school hallway, toddling unsteadily toward Max, who waited patiently, tail wagging encouragingly. Emily caught it on video, and there wasn't a dry eye in the building when it was shared at the next staff meeting. As Hope grew, Emily kept a special scrapbook filled with pictures, notes, and memories. The first page held a photo of Max from that October morning, and beside it, the simple note that had been found with Hope. "Please give her a better life than I can." Below it, Emily had written, "Thank you for trusting us. She is loved beyond measure." The story of Max and Hope became part of Riverside Elementary's legacy, a reminder that heroes come in all forms, that family isn't always about blood, and that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the courage to let go. Max continued his daily rounds, bringing comfort and joy to students, but everyone knew that his greatest achievement wasn't just finding hope. It was helping to create a miracle that would inspire generations to come.